You know, in church Facebook groups and on YouTube videos, there's one comment that I keep seeing over and over again when people are talking about the Behringer WING, and that's that it's not volunteer friendly. Well, personally, I think it is, but don't just take my word for it, because I'm gonna bring in our volunteers and ask them what they think about using the Behringer WING. Give us a little background info. How many years have you been mixing? What's your experience level, just to get started here?
I've been mixing for probably a couple of years. I've mixed more with the previous board here at Cornerstone. That's where I started.
I have about 9 years of experience, I would say. I was at a church for 4 years and then I came here.
I've probably been mixing for about 2 to 3 years here. I've only been on 2 boards, this one that we have here, the Wing, and then the one that we had before.
All your experience had just been here at the church, right?
Yeah, it's pretty much just here.
That's why I wanted you even for this video, because I think you'd be a good person to ask. Even with maybe a limited background, I think that's important here, really testing how volunteer friendly it is.
I have been doing some sort of audio engineering, sound stuff off and on for probably about 20 years or so.
Because you're a drummer first, but then sometimes you're back behind the board.
Drummer, and for 2 years our band toured for a little bit, and we had our own equipment. So we took our own soundboard, we set it up, we mixed it properly, or at least as best we could.
So what console would you say you have the most experience with?
Definitely the previous one we had, which was the X32, I believe. That's the one that I definitely use the most. I've done this one a couple times, but definitely have a lot more experience with the X32.
I definitely feel, at least now, a lot more confident in using the Wing than I feel like I did with the X32. I feel like I understand the board a whole lot better.
The one I would say I'm most comfortable with is the X32.
Probably the PreSonus that we had before. I think we had that one here probably the longest, where I was really using it on a weekly or bi-weekly basis.
And so now the question that everyone is here for, is the Wing volunteer friendly?
Yes, most definitely. As long as your volunteers are willing to put in the effort to learn. I think that's the biggest thing, is if they're willing to learn, it's a very intuitive, very user-friendly, volunteer-friendly soundboard that can do a lot of amazing things. I'm really excited about it. I was a little skeptical at first. I have come to like it more than the PreSonus. And I'm really glad we have this one, because to me it's a lot easier now to use than the PreSonus was. So I think any volunteer that's willing to put in the work can go, oh yeah, it's easy to do it.
I would say it's volunteer friendly. I mean, I started on an analog board, so digital was new to me when I got here, and I think if you know how to run sound, know how to mix, know how to EQ, know how to compress things, you can do it. I mean, there's some complex things inside of the board, but that stuff that's extra. The actual mixing is fairly simple.
I think that this one, on first glance, can appear more daunting than the X32, but I do think once you sort of get a general idea of like the interface up here and sort of what these buttons do, you can pick it up pretty quick, I would say.
At first, it's definitely really intimidating, but once you get behind it and get some time with it, it definitely feels a lot more easier to use as a volunteer than other soundboards. My only experience is with the X32, but I would say that the Wing is much easier to use as a volunteer than the X32 was.
So now, what would you say is your favorite thing about the Wing?
Oh, absolutely, the touchscreen thing here. Like you get this big screen, you know, it makes it appear more fancy, but also just being able to EQ with your finger as you're watching the waveform move around, and being able to EQ it and just be able to move around all of this interface simply through the touchscreen is really nice. It's probably my favorite feature of this board.
Big step up from the X32.
Oh, absolutely, and super cool, super cool.
I would say my favorite thing about the Wing is, one, just the touch screen in general of the board. Right. I mean, it's so easy to move around with this touchscreen, but then the EQ, the parametric EQ, you can see exactly what you're doing. A problem I had with the analog boards, I can't actually see what I'm doing. It's nice for someone who's not professional. to be able to see what I'm doing.
It's very user-friendly. You can see everything you need there.
My favorite thing about this board is the touch screen.
Right.
And the whole interface. And again, first impression, it kind of felt like it was going to be overwhelming to learn. You know, after using it for really just a short amount of time, I can go right to the EQ, the compressor, the inputs, the gains, all of that stuff is pretty intuitive once you kind of learn where everything is. And having that control right there on your fingertips is a lot easier, and especially with the EQ, because on the PreSonus you had certain frequencies and that's what you had.
Right.
And here you've got the touch screen where you can go specifically to the frequency that you want. And you can fine tune it a lot better on this board than you can on the PreSonus.
Yeah, a little bit easier to pick up when you have the visual representation.
That's exactly right.
So what would you say is your least favorite thing about the Wing?
It would probably have to do with the way the EQing works on it, because when you had the X32, there were sound waves that appeared while you were EQing. That way you could kind of see what you need to hit and what need to be focused on. But on the Wing, you just have the actual EQing ability, and you kind of have to hear for what needs to be focused in on and things like that.
Right, right. That's true, which I have thought about that a few times, because when you're in the EQ menu and you're kind of working on the EQ, there's no audio spikes along those frequencies. As something's playing, you can't really have a visual representation of what frequencies are coming in where.
And that's definitely something that the X32 did well, because that really helps to zone in on what frequencies need to be focused on, while on the Wing you kind of just need to wing it on your own.
My first thing that I want to mention is this custom control setting. I don't like how it completely just separates this last bank.
Yeah.
I wish the last bank of faders was closer and this custom controls area was over on the far side, because I feel like I'm always having to reach over. The second thing I don't like is we have this touch screen, and then right next to it you have everything that the touch screen does. You have all these knobs, and I don't think I've ever touched this channel processing area at all, because I always use the touchscreen.
If we took the custom controls and moved it up here and replaced this, then you could even have another bank of faders.
Right, you could add more, and that'd be amazing.
I think it does take a little bit longer to sort of get yourself involved with it. Before, when we had the X32, that was a little bit simpler. Once you actually start to sit down, take the time, watch someone else use it, it really does start to make a lot of sense and be a lot more user-friendly, I think.
That actually kind of ties into this next question. What do you think the learning curve is for this board compared to other boards you've used? Like, so for example, compared to the X32, what do you think the learning curve is like?
Like I said, I think it's a little bit more steep, but I also think that that's because it just has a little bit more going on. So I think the learning curve actually comes from the daunting, like looking at the board. But I think once you, like I said, once you actually start to touch the knobs and start to use them and start to go through it and watch someone else do it, I feel like it is a bit steeper of a learning curve, but in the end, I think that anyone could really pick up on it.
I don't think it was any more difficult. Setup wise, I think, yeah, it would be more difficult, but somebody coming in and learning just how to run it.
How to mix on a Sunday.
Live performance, how to mix on a Sunday. The learning curve is just as easy or as hard, however much you're willing to put into it, really, as any other board. You go back to the analog boards and you're like, oh my gosh, all these knobs, what am I going to do with all these knobs? And all it was a high, mid, and low, and then like a high mid and a low mid or something like that. Yeah, and that was it. And you know, here you've got everything all in one, where those analog boards, you would have a rack that also had your compressor and all these other digital accompaniments to go along with the analog board. But this, you have everything in it. So it's a little overwhelming at first, but once you kind of learn, okay, well, this is what I used to do on the PreSonus. I just need to remember this is where it is. And that's honestly how I came in and learned it was, okay, on the PreSonus, I would go here and do this and do this. I just need to learn where those things are, and then I can do it. And that's really what it was for me. As far as just somebody coming in brand new, never using anything before, I think it would be just as easy, because it's a matter of learning what the important things are to work on first. A lot of the extras, you don't really have to learn at the beginning. And so once you learn the basics and you get that down, then you can start adding in all the different effects and the compressors and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So there's still a lot on here that I haven't learned.
Right.
And I'm okay with that. But you know, as things come up, they're just going to be little things that we add to what I already know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's not terribly overwhelming.
When we got the X32 here, I wasn't comfortable with it at first. After running it a couple of times, it got pretty easy. And I think it's the same with this one, honestly. The first couple of times, like when we were setting it up, and then the first Sunday I ran it, I wasn't completely familiar with it. But within 2 or 3 weeks of running it, I was completely fine.
For me, at least, when I was starting on the X32, I was starting from complete scratch, knowing absolutely nothing. So it was a lot more difficult for me to get into it. Coming onto the wing, I obviously knew a little bit more about it and that kind of thing, but it felt a whole lot easier to learn what the different knobs did and how to set things up the way I wanted them to be compared to the X32, which I felt like I only really could mess with audio levels.
Did it feel more intimidating though when you got behind it, you think?
At first, it definitely looks a whole lot more intimidating because there's just a lot of stuff going on the board, along with the touch screen that you just see all these different areas on the touch screen that you can do stuff with, as well as just everything that's on the board itself. Definitely looks a lot more intimidating at first, but once you get like a little bit of practice behind it, it feels a lot more simpler.
The most common reason that people usually give to say that it's not volunteer friendly is setup and routing. If we reset the board, everything else is still the same. You just have to bring all those inputs in, route them and send them where you want to go, and create those channels and put them where they need to go, and reroute everything to the outputs, route stuff to the live stream. On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident do you think you would be if you had to go set everything back up internally on the board?
I would say maybe like a 6 or 7. Not fully confident in it because I don't know all the intricacies of routing with it, but I feel like I know enough to where I could get the bare necessities down so that we could run it on a Sunday, say if it all just wiped itself for no reason. It would definitely take a little bit of time to make sure I knew how everything needed to be routed, and it would take a little bit of trial and error probably. Right. But I feel like over a little bit of time, I would be able to get it set up most of the way.
Completely on my own, I'd say it's a little bit lower, only because I've never, routed anything like this before. However, I did watch you a little bit when you were setting up this board, and I feel like if I really went through the settings and actually looked at how things are routed currently, and then you were to strip it apart, I feel like I could put it back together. I do feel like the interface is friendly enough.
I could easily route everything to this soundboard, just playing around. I watched you set it up a little bit, but just playing around, I've looked at the routing, because we've had to change some of the stuff with routing just for when we've changed the stereo on instruments or stuff like that. But the routing process is fairly easy. It shows you where you're getting it from. So if you know, the local stuff is going to be plugged right into the board. So we know what that is, and it's going to be easy to figure that out. And then everything else just goes into the snake we have. And everything's labeled pretty well. I mean, it would take a minute to figure out what the labels were, because we would have to relabel everything. But I could definitely do it, but not just because I watched you do it. Mostly. I played around with the board enough, I know what to do. The only thing I would have an issue with is running it to our live stream.
So wrapping up, any additional thoughts or things you want to mention about the Wing, just in general, that maybe we didn't cover in any of those questions?
Sure. Well, I think, like for me, this is like a really cool piece of tech, and as someone who loves tech, I think that if I was a volunteer coming into this, it may be daunting at first, but I really do think this is an awesome thing to be able to utilize, and it has a ton of tools in it to be able to make your stuff sound awesome and be able to mix right. But I really think if I was a volunteer coming into this, I'd be excited to use it. You can take pride in it and be like, man, look what I can do, look what I can learn how to do, and I just really think it's an awesome piece of tech.
First impression when I came in, I was overwhelmed. All the lights and buttons, because it just didn't seem like there was as much on the PreSonus as there is on here. Looking back on it, I think this is actually easier to use than the PreSonus once you learn it and understand it. But I love the ability to kind of set your more common channels in these certain little user groups, and I think that's really user-friendly, even depending on who is running sound, they can customize it to fit them the best. I think that's really cool.
I definitely think I'm glad that we upgraded to the Wing because it's just a lot nicer to use overall than what the X32 was.
Right. You can be real if you wish you went back to the X32.
Oh no, I think everything except for that one thing with the audio levels on EQ, I think everything's better on the Wing than it was with the X32.
You have a lot of options on this thing. Most options that volunteers will never touch, but that doesn't mean that the basics aren't simple enough for someone to just jump in and be able to mix with, because I think it's perfect for that.
Right, and I think that's actually a good point to make, because like you want it to be easy to access, easy to get into, but then it gives you also room to grow. You can grow with it. So as you get better, as you become a more experienced sound engineer, you can then add in some of those extra features that maybe you haven't touched, but are there, but you haven't touched them yet.
Right, and I mean, it also allows, like, if for some reason you got someone that came to your church that is a sound engineer, well, they have the flexibility with this board to really go into detail and do some awesome stuff with it, but doesn't leave out the little guy who wants to come in and just start fresh, so I think it's a good board for that.
Now I'm going to give you my final thoughts and big takeaways after hearing everyone's responses to these questions. But first, if you made it this far in the video, please drop a like and share this with a friend. It would help out a ton, and there's probably someone that you know that would enjoy this video as well. So after going through everyone's responses, I think all of our guys genuinely enjoy using the Wing and are glad that we have it. I didn't script anyone on this. I didn't tell them what to say. You know, I gave them some time to think about the questions and then let them respond however they see fit. And really, I was surprised that they didn't have many critiques to give. There are little grievances here and there, but I think overall everyone is pretty happy with this board. And to wrap this video up, I think my kind of big takeaway from this and talking to our volunteers is I think it is a good board to mix on. And I think that was stated by some of our guys. You know, if you're brand new to mixing and everything is set up, but you just come in here and you move faders and you learn how to, you know, mix a service well, it's a good board for that, for learning the bare bones of mixing. But then the upside to this is that it grows with you as you gain more skill. And I think that's a great board to have in a church setting like this, because a lot of these people, you know, again, they might not have a lot of experience, especially in smaller churches, but they have room to grow with this board. So they could literally, you know, practice and work on new things every single week. They could add a little bit to their plate and they could learn a little bit more and take another step forward. So I think it just gives a lot of room to grow as a sound engineer. And obviously that's not to say that you can't do that with an X32 or M32 or some other board, but I think this just lends itself to that really well, and it's a great board for that. And some people might prefer those other boards over this one, and you know, that's fine. I just wanted to know what our volunteers thought and share that with you, because you know, when you talk about is it volunteer friendly or if it's not, the most important thing is what do the volunteers think? And so that's what I wanted to do with this video. Hopefully this is helpful to you, shed some light on maybe the Wing if you're thinking about picking it up, or if you're wondering if, you know, your volunteers can get a handle of it. If you're making a decision like that, hopefully this helps you with that decision. And if you liked hearing what our volunteers, our guys had to say, and maybe you have some other topics that you want them to weigh in on, maybe we'll do this again with some other kind of topic, some other piece of gear, and bring in our volunteers again, because it was fun to kind of sit down and talk with them and really get their thoughts and feelings and opinions about the Behringer Wing. Anyway, with that being said, appreciate you watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.